Hello readers and writers, welcome back to the channel. Today we are finally reviewing The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. For those who do not know, this is an epic fantasy series and this is book 1 in the Stormlight archive. I know I've been gone for a minute, but I'm back and I'm excited to talk about this book. There is a lot to be said, so let's jump right into it. First and foremost, I always love to start these reviews with whether or not you should read this book, and I am happy to say I think you should. But there are a few caveats that we will get into later in this review. I think that this book is as epic fantasy gets. If that is what you are looking for, then don't hesitate any longer. If you're on the fence, just jump right into it. This is epic fantasy in its purest form. And this is epic fantasy in its most digestible form. Brandon Sanderson really tries to beat you over the head with information to make sure you understand what he is talking about. If a character is plotting to do something at the end of the book, he is going to remind you what that plot is over and over and over again. If there is a lore element that is introduced that you may not understand, he is literally going to explain it word for word right there in the middle of the sentence, like right after he introduces it. So for better or for worse, a lot of people won't like that, but a lot of people will like that. I'm kind of in the middle. It was a bit egregious sometimes, but I think for someone who is trying to get into the epic fantasy genre, this is going to be a really good starting point. For people who are more experienced in the genre, I don't know. I think that you're going to enjoy this, but I think you're going to feel like this has training wheels in a way. He just explains like everything. Literally everything, and repeats himself a lot. So just keep that in mind. If you're already experienced, this may feel like a bit of a step backwards, but I think that if you're new to the genre, you're going to love this, just like I did. I was truly blown away with this book, and we're going to talk about all that, but I just want to get that out of the way. Should you read this? Yes. Go for it. Worst case scenario, you bounce off of it and you don't enjoy it. But best case scenario, you read the whole thing, you have an amazing experience, and you enjoy it. So where does this book take place? Well, this takes place on the planet of Roshar within the Cosmere universe. And for those who do not know, the Cosmere is a giant interconnected universe which is made up of all of the books that Brandon Sanderson has written. I've only read The Way of Kings, so I didn't really pick up on any of the other references from the other books. But if you have read things like Mistborn or Warbreaker, like you might have some connections. Not exactly sure what they are, but at least it's kind of like the Marvel movies and stuff like that. Like you're going to get all these different references, crossover characters, references to different events and things like that across these different books. So that's a pretty cool thing. But where does this take place? This takes place on the Shattered Plains, which are these giant plains with massive crevices in them, and there's a war going on. So the main conflict, the main story takes place on these plains. That is where you're going to spend the bulk of the story. And then there's another city called Kharbranth, which we will talk about later, and who really focuses on that city. And but mostly you're going to get the Shattered Plains. That's going to be the main conflict, the main area. And honestly, it's pretty damn cool. The world building in this is definitely a highlight. I really cannot talk highly enough of the world building. You have these things called the high storms, which are gigantic, insane storms that move across the land, pour down a ton of rain, lightning, destroy shit. I mean, they're just like massive hurricanes. And the ecology, like the plants and stuff on Roshar, have kind of adapted to suck up as much of the rain as possible during these high storms, and then to kind of retreat into the walls when it's not happening. So this world feels incredibly real. Brandon Sanderson did such a fantastic job really designing this world to reflect these storms and to reflect a lot of like what kind of creatures would, evolve in a place like this. And so I really have to give it to Brandon Sanderson. That's, to me, one of the coolest parts of this story is the world building. So if you are a massive fan of intricate worlds that have accurate flora and fauna that, you would recognize in a setting like this with giant storms or whatever, you're going to absolutely love The Way of Kings. He really took his time with it. I would say the only comparable thing that I've read that is on the detail of this is like Dune, but it doesn't feel nearly as scientific as Dune does. Dune can sometimes definitely feel like you're reading a science textbook, and maybe sometimes it's too much. But at least for Brandon Sanderson, it feels like everything makes sense within the laws of the world and the rules of the world, but it's not going to be over the top where you're just kind of rolling your eyes like, okay, come on, we get it. So yeah, it feels lived in, it feels real, and it's a fantastic and really cool world. You have also these things called spren, which show up like they're these like almost like kind of little balls of light in a way that kind of show up whenever something happens. So like they match either emotions or they match like environmental things that are going on, like rain or wind. So you'll have rain, wind spren. If someone is like dying on the battlefield or they have like, you know, a infection or something, you're going to have like rot spren kind of coming out of their wounds. But then if you're in love with someone, you're going to have like love spren. If you're fighting someone on a battlefield, you're going to have glory spren, like kind of going around you and floating around you. And if you're in great pain, you'll have pain spren. So that's kind of a cool aspect of it, in my opinion. I didn't really expect to see something like that. Like, that's just such a random detail, but it is pretty cool seeing the different kinds of spren. And then also sometimes it can get a little too much. Like, he highlights it every single time there's something going on. There's like some, like I said, there's like a love scene. Oh, now we have love spren flying around us. And it's just like, okay, all right, we get it with the spren stuff. But I just thought I would include that in the world building. It is, there's a lot. There's spren for pretty much everything. And it's just kind of a cool detail that you might not see in other books. And then let's go ahead and jump into the magic system while we're on the world building elements. Really, the main magic system focuses around Stormlight, which can be infused into you if you have that ability. It can make you faster, it can make you jump higher, it can make you stronger, it can make you heal, it can make you stick to walls. It can make you stick objects to walls. You can invert yourself, so you can, it's called lashing, and you can like fly upwards even if you're standing on the ground. You can fly horizontally just by kind of like changing your orientation in the world. Really cool stuff. And then you have the things that revolve around the like shards, which is like shard plates and shard blades. Shard plates are the armor that the main characters can wear, makes them stronger, like I said before. Makes them kind of like invulnerable. If you see someone wearing shard plate, like, you're not going to really be able to fuck with them. And then they carry shard blades, which are these gigantic swords, kind of like lightsabers. They can cut through anything. They can pretty much kill anyone in a single swipe. And like I said, if you see someone with either a shard blade or a shard plate or both, you are screwed. So the shard plate can heal itself over time, but it can be damaged. And when it damages, it can leak stormlight into the air and kind of like shatter and break away. So all really cool stuff. The shard blades can be like summoned instantly out of thin air. And then if you drop it, it like dissolves into mist. It takes like 10 heartbeats to summon your shard blade. So like I said, really, really cool world building elements. If you're a fan of deep lore, deep world building, you're going to love this. You're going to find enough of that stuff to fill your, to your heart's content. You're going to have so much world building that you're honestly, I don't want to say you're going to get tired of it after a while, but at some point you wonder like, oh my God, how much more can we discover? And then more comes. So of course, for better or for worse, some people are really going to like that. I would 100% go into this if you are just a fiend for world building and lore, because there is so much of this. I can't even cover half of it. I'm not even going to try and cover the history of this book because there's so much, but go into it and have an open mind and be ready to learn, because this book is going to beat you over the head with information. I should probably put this up. I don't know why I had it laying there. So I think that about covers it for the world building and the magic system. Again, there's so much, so go ahead and do your own research if you're more curious about it, because I could probably talk for an hour just on the world building. It is that deep. But if you were wondering, like, will this book have enough world building for me? Yes, 100%. Fire it up, go into it for that aspect. Now let's go ahead and jump into the characters and the main perspectives that you're going to see in this book. You have 4 main perspectives. You have Dalinar, you have Kaladin, Adolin, and Shallan. And let me just say this, not all perspectives are created equally. Kaladin Stormblessed was by far and away my favorite character. I absolutely adored him. He was amazing. Now, who is Kaladin Stormblessed? Well, Kaladin Stormblessed starts off the story as a slave, but he has history as like a soldier and kind of like a leader and a medic as well from like his youth. So he has a lot of experience, and when he is brought into the Shattered Plains as a slave, he's assigned to a group called Bridge 4. And Bridge 4 is tasked with carrying these gigantic bridges over their heads and placing them on chasms so that the High Princes, which Dalinar and Adolin are, and their armies can run across, chasing gemstones and fighting Parshendi, which we can talk about later. But essentially, Kaladin is in charge of one of these bridges. He doesn't start that way. This entire book is kind of like a progressive fantasy story. He's going to slowly move into these roles. When you first see him, he's nothing. He's not a leader. He's not strong. He's nothing. Like, this guy is just beaten down. He's almost given up on life. But as the story progresses, you're going to see more and more of his true self coming out and leading this group. But Bridge 4 is made up of a bunch of different characters. It's kind of like an ensemble. You have like some reoccurring people that you're really going to like Rock and Teft and Moash. But then there are some that kind of are on the outside that you don't really learn about and don't really grow with. And they're just kind of there. But the whole point of Bridge 4 is that, or, Bridge runners just in general, is that they are expendable. They're supposed to die. They're not expected to live past their first run. So essentially, Kaladin has a problem with that. He doesn't want his people just to die. He doesn't want to die himself. So the plot of the story with Kaladin really follows him trying to figure out ways to keep his men alive, bring them together, and make them more than just this expendable group of, bridge runners and bridge crew and whatever else. So you don't really follow anyone else in that group like one-on-one really. It's mainly just Kaladin, and then he's kind of like overseeing the rest of them. Then we'll go to Dalinar and Adolin. This is another POV that you're going to see a lot. They are High Princes. I would say between the two, Dalinar is the much more entertaining and interesting one out of the two. Adolin kind of just falls back in the background. He doesn't have much of an arc. I would say by the end, he is more redeemable. He's cooler. I liked him more by the end, but at the start of the story, he wasn't really much, and I don't expect you to like Adolin all that much. But Dalinar is pretty cool. He's dealing with visions from an unknown source that are trying to kind of guide his life and tell him how to act. And they started after he read a book in this story called The Way of Kings. So you're going to see him leading his armies. You're going to see him fighting on the Shattered Plains. And these two POVs are really where you're going to see like the politics of the story. So if you're interested in the politic aspect of a war, or the political aspect of a war and whatever else, then you're going to see that and find that in the Dalinar and Adolin chapters, and you're really going to get enough of that where you're going to have a good time. I would say that sometimes it can kind of drag, and the Dalinar chapters just you're like, all right, can we get on with it? But if you're big into politics in these like types of fantasy stories, I think you're really going to like the Dalinar and Adolin chapters. And then there's also like plenty of action and fight scenes with them as well. So it's not purely just sitting around in rooms talking about the wars. Like you see them boots on the ground, leading men, leading armies, and fighting for these gemstones, and it's pretty badass and pretty great. Then you have Shallan. She is like the last POV, main POV. There are some exceptions, but she is like the main, the fourth main POV that you're gonna see. And Shallan, not my favorite. I'm not gonna talk too much about Shallan. I don't feel like she had much of an arc. I don't feel like her story was very developed. I don't feel like it really led to anything. It kind of just led to a cliffhanger, and it was just not that entertaining to read. She has a plot to steal this thing called a soul caster, which can like transform different objects and into different things. So you could transform like a block of cheese into a block of gold. Like it's really powerful, really important within this world. And she wants to steal it to kind of like save her kingdom that she came from and not get exposed for her father's death and things like that. So the whole story for her is pretty much plotting against this other character named Jasna, which is like a scholar who she's like working under kind of like as an apprentice and studying under. She's trying to steal this soul caster from Jasna, and it's boring. I really don't know what else to say. I'm not a fan of the Shallan chapters. People are like, oh, it's going to get good. It's going to get better. It didn't. It did not get better. I was not a fan. Truthfully, I hate to say it. Shallan was so boring to me. She over and over and over again, she repeated that she was going to betray Jasna over and over and over again. I have to betray Jasna. I have to. How am I going to get the strength? How am I going to be able to do this? For 1,000 pages. Like legitimately, it just repeats itself over and over. So you might have a better time with Shallan. I did not. And for the Shallan fanatics out there who enjoy her chapters, which I'd be very surprised if you did, you might have something else to say. But to me, Shallan was so damn boring, and her story was not even comparable to Dalinar's at the very least, and then was like nowhere near Kaladin's. Kaladin's story was amazing, and I don't say that lightly, and we're going to talk more about Kaladin in a second, but his story was fantastic. Hers, on the other hand, was not very good. Then you have a few side characters. Syl is like a conscious spren who floats around Kaladin the whole time and kind of talks to him, and he's able to kind of confide in with Syl. She's kind of like almost like a fairy kind of character. If you've read Berserk, she's similar to like the fairy that kind of follows Guts around and things like that. So very similar type of character. Doesn't do a whole lot, but is just kind of there for Kaladin to talk to, so he's just not talking to himself the whole time. Then you have Szeth, who is one of my favorite characters. He is going to be one of the first characters you read when you start this book. He is the assassin in white, Truthless of Shinovar, Sun Valano. I don't even know. I might be completely wrong, but he's got like 5 different names, and Sanderson says the whole name every single time he's introduced. It's pretty funny, actually, and he's great. He's an assassin. I don't know how much I really want to say about him, because he kind of, you learn about him more, and it's kind of a spoiler for why he does what he does. So I'm not going to speak too much about him, but he is a shard bearer. He has a blade. He has the armor. He can fuck anyone up. He's not, or maybe, I don't know if he does have the armor, actually. I think he might just have a shard blade. But regardless, he's incredibly powerful, and he's an assassin, and he's always going to fuck shit up anytime you see his chapter. He had some of the most entertaining chapters within the book. So anytime I saw Szeth coming out, I was like, all right,
this is going to be fun. So really like Szeth. And then Hoid is the King's Wit. He's introduced kind of towards the end, I believe, but I really enjoyed him. Let me know if Hoid is another reoccurring character within the Cosmere, because if he is, I would love to read more about him, because he came in kind of towards the end, but he was one of my favorite characters. I loved him. Brandon Sanderson was like in his bag while he was writing Hoid. He's funny, he's philosophical, he's interesting. He seems self-aware. I don't know if that's true. Like, he seems like he knows he's in this story, but who knows? I haven't done too much reading on Hoid, but he's pretty badass, or pretty cool, I should say, pretty interesting to follow. So I enjoyed Hoid. Then you also have other characters like Satiate, who is intertwining with Dalinar and Adolin, and he's also a high prince. He's like a main character within their story. And then you also have the current king, Elokar, and the previous king who was assassinated by the Parshendi, which is Gavilar. Who are the Parshendi? They are the people who are fighting Dalinar, Adolin, and everyone else, all the high princes on the Shattered Plains. They're like the main antagonist, the main villain of that story. And they are, like I said, they're in conflict because they assassinated their previous king. And then they also all want the gemstones, which are like powerful things that contain stormlight. They're also used as currency. The gemstones are just like, picture them just like big chunks of gold that like everyone wants. You can do more research into them exactly. I could be butchering that, but essentially it starts out as like a fight for the gemstones, but it transforms into more later. The gemstones aren't like really the center of the conflict as the story progresses. So that pretty much does it for who all the characters are, who all you're going to see in this story. I get that if this is a lot, it's hard to follow. I just thought I would lay it all out, but you're going to see all these characters. You're going to understand who they all are eventually, and you're going to get a good idea for what this story is about and what these characters are doing pretty much right off the rip. It doesn't take that long to get into the swing of things. So if you feel confused by all these names and whatever else, don't worry. It's really not that complicated once you get into it. It can be a bit of a shock when you first get to it, but overall it is pretty self-explanatory once you get into it. But to round off the characters before we get into some other stuff, Kaladin by far and away was my favorite. He has one of the best arcs I've ever seen in fiction. I wouldn't say I absolutely adored this book. I really, really enjoyed it, and we'll talk about the rating and everything later. But what I loved the most was Kaladin. I loved Kaladin. He was such a cool character, such a great leader, had a great arc, had an amazing backstory. You're going to see a lot of flashbacks in this story. You're going to jump around a lot. But Kaladin, out of everyone, had the most interesting story, to me at least, to follow. He starts out as a nobody, and by the end, he's almost unrecognizable. And then when you learn why he acts the way he does with his backstory and stuff, it's all very believable. It's all great. Awesome to follow. I loved Kaladin, standout character. And if I could read the rest of these books just with Kaladin alone, I would. If I could have read The Way of Kings entirely with just Kaladin, I would have. Even though I would have missed Dalinar, but Kaladin was 100% the standout character for me. So I've pretty much already talked about the plot within the characters. And so I think I'm just going to go ahead, because I don't want to bore you guys, too much about the plot and the intricacies of it, because I think you're going to figure that stuff out as you're reading it. But I think I want to touch on more of the general overview ideas of what this book, really entails, and what I think you're going to see, not on a story level, but in terms of Sanderson's writing style and his prose and things like that. I think I want to touch on that mostly. When I first walked into this book, and I had no idea what to expect. I've never read a Brandon Sanderson book. I've read like a couple pages of Elantris, and I stopped because I didn't like it. I'll just say that. I was not a fan of Elantris. If I go back and read it now, I think I might enjoy it, but Elantris kind of felt like full of itself. It felt like it was just fantasy for the sake of being fantasy, throwing tons of references and names and all this stuff at you. And it just, I didn't vibe with that part of Elantris, but this felt like a more refined version of that. You're still getting all the epic fantasy elements, but you are not getting, it doesn't feel self-indulgent for the sake of it. So when I first came into this book, Brandon Sanderson to me was pitched as having terrible writing. I know that like hurts to hear, and I know that a lot of people disagree with that, and I will be the first to admit I disagree with it too. A lot of people said that Brandon Sanderson is not a good writer, and I think that is like with his prose, but that's not true. His prose is serviceable, and I think that unless you're a writer yourself, I don't think you realize how good his writing actually is unless you've been doing it or trying to do it yourself. And what I mean by that is it's like watching a professional football player or whatever else make something look easy, but then when you go and try and do it, it's like, oh shit, that was way harder than I expected. So yes, Brandon Sanderson is not nearly as good as the Ursula K. Le Guins of the world, or the Robin Hobbs, or the Steven Eriksons, or the Patrick Rothfuses, or even Tolkien. Like, you're not going to get these just wordsmith masters, level like with his writing. You're not going to get that with him. So if you go into this expecting beautiful, flowery, just flowing prose in iambic pentameter, you're not going to get that. But you're going to get serviceable prose. You're going to get prose that gets the story across clearly. That's what I mean by serviceable. And that's a hard thing to do. I think Brandon Sanderson is a master of explaining tough and complicated aspects and concepts of this book in an easy to read and follow way. So let's reference Dune again. Dune has a lot of crazy world building elements and has a lot of crazy philosophy and has a lot of crazy moments wrapped up in that book. But is Dune easy to read? No. Like, Frank Herbert is not an author that is going to hold your hand and help you through this book. But a lot of people love that. And a lot of people don't like how Brandon Sanderson will help you through this book. But I think for the majority of people out there, the general public, they're going to love the way Brandon Sanderson writes. And I think to be able to write a book clearly and easy to follow, I think that in and of itself is one of the best things you can do. For instance, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter. That is an easy to understand book. That is an easy to follow series. Those books are easy to read, even though they're made for kids. But then obviously once, the series goes on, you're going to get into more adult things. The bottom line is that it's an easy to follow series. This is like the evolution of Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. Again, both great series that are just easy to read. His prose is easy to follow. It can be a bit boring because of that. And it can be a bit, I don't know. You might not enjoy reading every single passage of this, but he's going to get all of his points clearly across. If you're reading action within this book, the action in this is so vivid. It's so fluid. It's so easy to follow. So many authors, you read their action sequences and you're just like, oh my God, what is going on here? But even in the first chapter with Zeth, where he's lashing all over the place and he's flying across the room, you're following that pretty easily. And that's a very hard thing to do as a writer. Like the first introduction to your world and your story and your characters, you're also introducing all these crazy elements, magical elements, but they're easy to follow. The action is clear. So I'm going to defend Brandon Sanderson and his writing and these books and him as an author until the day I die. Even though I've only read The Way of Kings so far. I need to read Mistborn. I need to see his other stuff. But I'm a fan. I have to say I'm a fan of how this guy writes. It does become a bit bland and stale after a while. I think that if you read a bunch of his books back to back to back to back, you're not going to have the best time. I think that you're going to get pretty burnt out. And I think a lot of people probably share my sentiment here. I think that if you try and just binge read Brandon Sanderson's stuff, it's just going to kind of go in one ear and out the other. Whereas if you go and read someone who's maybe a little bit more complicated and then you come back, then I think that it's going to be like kind of that breath of fresh air where you're like, oh, okay, I don't have to think too hard while reading this. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to defend Brandon Sanderson. I'm going to say that he knows what he's doing as a writer. And that is purely just based off his prose and his writing style. I'm not saying he's the best out there. And I'm not even talking about the world building or his character work or his plot work. I mean, literally all that stuff just makes it even better. Makes it 10 out of 10. But just based off of his prose and how he can just easily convey his ideas onto the page and still make it fun to follow and still make it descriptive enough, because again, another big, complaint that people have is, oh, there's not enough description with Brandon Sanderson. It's like, there's plenty of description. He actually, in my opinion, has the perfect amount. He's never going to over-explain anything, but he's going to give you enough that anytime someone walks in a room, you're going to be able to pretty much see what they're wearing, picture what they're wearing. The landscape is going to be pretty well detailed. You're always going to have a good idea of what the world looks like and the creatures that are crawling around and the swords and the armor. He's going to explain and describe those kinds of things very well, but he's not going to describe every single pebble and flower that you cross during your journey. So description, in my opinion, for Brandon Sanderson was pretty good. No complaints there. Truly, no complaints on the description side of things, which I was very surprised about. And again, the prose, the writing style is all serviceable, got the points across, and in my opinion, it was fantastic. For that, is it as good as some of these others? No, not even close. Like nowhere near how beautifully written The Name of the Wind was. Patrick Rothfuss is like a magician in that aspect. Brandon Sanderson is not. But does Brandon Sanderson blow his plot out of the water and his world building? Yes. So all these authors have different strengths. So I really have a hard time when people are trying to compare different authors and say, oh, well, this one's better than that one because of this. It's like, look at their strengths and look at what they're trying to do, and don't fault them for maybe not having the strongest prose in the game. Because you're missing so many other things. And I also think you're being too harsh, because Brandon Sanderson's prose is actually pretty good. If you read other authors who really don't know what they're doing, you read students writing, you read amateur beginner writing, whatever, you're going to see that this guy is still at the top of his game. He is going to be better than most people. It's why he's a professional author. It's why he has the #1 best-selling books in the world for fantasy. This guy knows what he's doing. So I'm a Brandon Sanderson defender. I'm a Brandon Sanderson supporter. This guy now has my support, and I believe in him. I think this guy's a great writer, and I'm going to stick up for him. I'm going to say that he's great. So I hope that does enough for his writing style. I hope you guys understand. But I just want to put that out there because I feel like I've heard that over and over and over again, especially on Reddit and in the fantasy subreddits, people just shitting on Brandon Sanderson's writing. And it's like, he's not that bad. He's actually a pretty good writer. So the one thing though that Brandon Sanderson I don't think is very good at, and the same thing that applies to Stephen King, pacing. This pacing is not good. The pacing in The Way of Kings is bad. Terrible even. For the first 500 pages. I had a really, really, really hard time reading these first 500 pages. A lot of you guys were wondering where I've been. I was trying to finish this book. And I didn't want to put out any other videos besides a review because that's what this channel is. It's mainly book reviews. So I didn't want to kind of lose the script. I didn't want to, turn this channel into something it isn't. This mainly is a book review channel. So people who are subscribed to me for that, fear not. That is what the majority of my videos will consist of. But this book took me forever, which is where I've been. That's been the holdup. I could not finish this book for the life of me. The first 500 pages are brutally slow. It actually took me almost 2 months to read this book, which is absurd. It was like a little bit less than 2 months, but regardless, I think this is the longest it's ever taken me to read a book. I think maybe the last time it took me that long to read a book was one of the Stephen King Dark Tower books, and probably like Wizard and Glass or something, or Wolves of the Kala. That book, god damn, talk about some slog. That was terrible. But the first 500 pages, geez, they were tough. So tough to get through. I was not looking forward to reading this book every day. I didn't enjoy sitting down and reading this. I was not having fun with it, and I was not enjoying it at all. Point blank period. I could see the glimmers of hope. I could see what he was trying to do in setting up the world and the world building and explaining everything. But I could not for the life of me see the plot. It's the exact same problem I had with the Blade itself. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know what we were doing. Why were we following this story? Why were we on the Shattered Plains? Where is this all building to? Where are we going with this story? I could not figure that out. It was truly brutal. And then I hit the 500 page mark or the 600 page mark, either way. And I think around the 500 page mark, it slowly started to get better. I slowly started to understand what this book was trying to do. The plot started to make sense. Then around the 600 page mark, I was hooked. I think I won't even say because it might be a spoiler. I'm going to maybe include it at the end if you guys want spoilers, or let me know down in the comments if you guys want to talk about what, hooked me. But I'm going to just stay away from spoilers for now. Spoiler free for the whole video. But around the 600 page mark, this book hooked me. And I was also determined to finish it to get this review out to you guys. I sat there in red for 3 days straight, 400 pages in 3 days. I read on my Kindle, I read on the hardcover, and I listened to the audiobook. And I even listened to the audiobook while I was reading at 1.9 or 2, like times 2, like speed. I was reading this book so fast. And I know that might sound crazy, like, oh, how'd you even understand anything? Somehow I did. I don't even know. It would range from 1.5. If I was tired, end of the day, it would be like 1.5 to 1.7. But if I was like ripping through it early morning, whatever, 1.8 to 2. That's the speed I was listening to the audiobook at. And that was the only way I was going to get through this thing, because it just was not hooking my attention. I just couldn't stay focused on it. Could be the Instagram reels, honestly, that have cooked me. But really, though, The Way of Kings, I just could not stay focused on this book for those first 500 pages. And even when I hit that 600 page mark, I was like, okay, I'm more interested now, but I have to finish this thing. I can't wait a month between videos. I've got to get this thing out. I've got to tell you guys what I thought about it. This is taking too long. So I read through this so freaking fast towards the end. 400 pages in 3 days, probably the fastest I've ever read any book. It was amazing. It was worth it. I loved those last 400 pages. The ending of this was fantastic. And the Sanderlanche that I have never experienced before from any other book was everything that you guys all said it was. Maybe not on the scale I was expecting. I was kind of expecting like a world-ending Sanderlanche, but in reality, it was pretty freaking good. And now I know, okay, don't expect a world-ending Sanderlanche every single time, but understand that it's going to be good, it's going to be entertaining, and it's going to be building towards something crazy no matter what. So now I know to at least mostly be able to push through these books, and I'm going to get an awesome climax at the end. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a good story at the end. And it's going to be worth the journey. So now that I know that, I think I would have a better time reading other things, especially like Elantris or Mistborn or something. But the Sanderlanche in this was fantastic, lived up to the hype. And I think if you are struggling to read this, stick with it. Give it some time. Don't expect too much in those first 500 pages, but read them as quickly as you can. Don't do what I did. I was reading like a chapter a day, and I was like, all right, there we go. I'm done. I'd read a Shallan chapter and be like, oh my God, that was like 30 pages. It was terrible. I hated it. I'm not picking up this book again today. Like I was in pain reading this because it was just not fun in those first 500 pages. But once the plot was like cohesive and the characters started crossing over each other and the plot lines started, intertwining, and you could understand where the story was going and what we were actually building towards, especially with Kaladin and like what he's trying to do with Bridge 4, I was hooked. And it actually, and then those 400 pages, even though I was speed running it, and trust me, I read it, understood it, and I got through it, and it was fantastic. But even though I was speedrunning it, I still think I was reading it that quickly because I was actually enjoying it, because I was able to. I wanted to see what would happen. So I do feel bad for the people who bounce off this book from those first 500 pages. And as many of you guys know, I am not the type of reader to put up with a book for 500 pages and not be entertained and not be happy. I've talked about it extensively. The Dark Tower was brutal, because I was not entertained. I wasn't following it. But I finish it, just like I will with every single book I start on this channel. I'm going to finish it if I'm planning on doing a review, because I think it's more valuable to get a video out and talk to you guys about these books, maybe even if I didn't like it, and talk to you guys why I disliked it, rather than not talking about it at all just because, it was boring, or, I didn't like it, or I didn't enjoy it, so I just stopped. No, I'm going to finish it. And that's what I promised with this book. I knew I talked about it with you guys. I was so excited to read it. The latest one, Wind and Truth, had just come out. I was like, I want to kind of be in the hype. I want to talk about, the Stormlight Archive, understand what people are talking about and whatever. But those first 500 pages were tough to get through. So if you're sitting here watching this and you're wondering, well, shit, should I put up with this? Should I even read this? Is it worth it? Yes, I think it is. And not even the ending is awesome, but it's not, I wouldn't say the ending made the entire book worth it. It wasn't one of those just mind-blowing endings where I just sat back and I was just like, oh my God, that was incredible. Like The Dark Tower, that's an ending that was like, okay, the entire journey, however many books that was, 7 books, that was worth it. This was not one of those scenarios. So if you're not enjoying it by the 500 or 600 page mark, or if you're not hooked in the slightest, the ending is not going to make up for the slog. I think you have to enjoy it to an extent. I think you have to enjoy it at least by the halfway mark. You have to be seeing something in there that you're liking, because the ending is not going to just wipe all that slog off the face of the earth. It's not just going to make it all worth it immediately. Like you need to enjoy something with it. It's also not going to fix Sanderson's writing. Those 400 pages have the slow moments with Shallan and Yasna, and there are parts of it where you're wondering, like, okay, where is this going? When can we get on with it? So you have to enjoy some aspect of this book, because if you don't, you're not going to enjoy the ending. You're not going to enjoy the whole thing. So I hope if you read it and you're not enjoying it like I did, you can at least see some of the bright spots, which I did. And there are some moments where I was like, ooh, that was sick. Or, okay, this character work is actually pretty good. Or this world building is really interesting to pay attention to and to learn about and to follow. But if you're not seeing any of that stuff, you're not going to like it. It's kind of like these videos, right? Like I talk for hours, I kind of ramble. But there's nothing I'm going to say at the end that's going to make this video worth watching to you. It's whether or not you want to listen to what I have to say. So if you want to listen to Sanderson almost ramble for 1,000 pages, you're going to love this. But if you're not liking Sanderson and his writing, you're not going to stick with it no matter what. So many people say the Sanderlanche is going to fix all the problems that you have. And if you're not enjoying it, we'll just push through and then it's going to make it all worth it. I'll be the first to tell you, don't read this if you're not enjoying it. Don't stick with it. Don't finish it. The ending is fantastic, but the ending is not going to make up for all the things that you dislike about it. Go read something that you actually like. Read a shorter book. Read something that engages you the whole way through. That's the beauty of art. Sometimes we love stuff, sometimes we don't, and it's all subjective. But The Way of Kings is going to be a very subjective book. A lot of people are going to really, really dislike it. And then I assume, because it's so popular, a lot of people love it. Is it my favorite book? No. Not even close. Did I really enjoy reading it? Especially the second half? Yes. Am I happy I read it? 100%. And I'll give you guys the rating at the end. But is it one of those where, was it worth reading a book this massive? I don't know. And I think I'm going to talk about that because perfect segue. Rhythm of War is not the second book in this series. I'm well aware of that. But I brought it out here just to show you guys this scale. I enjoyed The Way of Kings, but would I reread it? No. Will I even continue with the rest of the Stormlight archive? I don't know. I won't say a definitive answer, but for right now, I'm kind of leaning towards not for a long time. Don't expect a series review for the Stormlight Archive for a long time. I don't know if I'll ever finish these books, to be honest. There will probably be a day I will, but not for a while. Just look at the size, and we'll talk about this bad boy later. Look at the size between these. This is a Cormac McCarthy novel. This is The Way of Kings, and this is Rhythm of War. This is absurd. And I think I'm going to make a video talking about the case for shorter books. This is outrageous. I think that The Way of Kings, even after finishing it, I think it could have been 200 to 300 100 pages shorter, and it could have gotten the exact same point across. Maybe even better, because it could have been that much more concise, and I think the pacing could have been that much better. To think that The Way of Kings was already maybe the biggest book I've ever read outside of the Dark Tower books, to think that this was already massive, and then to see this, what the hell is this? I mean, it's almost double the size, and this was already a massive book. This is probably the biggest book I even want to read, and it took too long to read it. So when I see The Rhythm of War, I'm not excited. This turns me away from this series. I don't want to read the rest because of how massive these books are. For just pure Brandon Sanderson fanatics, I think that this is probably awesome to see. Because if I saw a Cormac McCarthy novel that was this big, I'd probably be like, okay, sick, hell yeah. But even then, man, I'm not a fan of these books, of these massive, giant doorstopper books. And I know that that's what makes up the majority of fantasy, which is, okay, good. Maybe if I read some others, my mind might be changed. But for right now, my opinion stands. These books are too big. And I think I saw the Wind in Truth in like the bookstore. And I think a lot of people are agreeing with me. Wind in Truth is a gigantic book. I think it's something absurd, like 1,700 pages. That's unreal. That's absurd. So I don't want to beat a dead horse for too long here, but I'm seeing that a lot of people online are talking about how that book is too long. It needs to be trimmed. It needs an editor. I think this was pretty polished. I think this was pretty good, besides the little bit of the pacing issues. But, I mean, come on, dude. I mean, what else can I say? That's just too huge. So that's just too big of a book right there. So I am not going to continue with this series for a long time, because I think in the time that I could read one of these, I could read 10 of these easily. I'm going to finish this book in like 3 days. Done. It took me 2 months to read this. And yes, it could be because I'm a slower reader, but I think that there's also a case that these books are just too massive for their own good. And so I hate to say it, but yeah, that turns me away. Sorry, guys. It stinks, but I really do think that these books would benefit greatly from being trimmed. Trim some of the fat. We don't need to sit here for hours and have 30 pages where the final thought, and this is something that he does almost every single chapter. You read 30 pages where you're like, okay, what was the point of that? And then on the second to last or the last page, you get that little nugget that hooks you to continue on. Like it's a cliffhanger or something, or it's a revelation. And then we're like, oh, so that's why we just read 30 pages of that. Where that idea could have been expressed in 5 pages or 10 pages. But it didn't need to be 20 or 30 pages to get that one idea across. So anyways, I'm the king of rambling myself, so who am I to even call this stuff out? But I don't write like this. So at least if you guys ever read anything that I write, it's not like these videos. These videos are just a stream of consciousness. We don't have a ton of time together, so why not just sit here and talk and not rush anything? But at least for these books, they could definitely benefit from an editor. And I haven't even read anything else. I haven't even read Wind and Truth, but I think a lot of people share this sentiment. I think that they could be trimmed, and I think that I think that covers it. I'm sorry, guys. I don't want to talk about this forever, but and this is kind of pretty much the end of the video too. I was just going to say that there's a cool thing, like when you read the beginning of the chapters, there's passages. These books are really well put together. You've got maps, if that's a map there. You've got like little passages at the beginning that end up having a pretty crazy meaning at the end that you don't understand while you're reading it. But when you get to the end, you're like, whoa, oh shit, now I understand it. But The interior layout and the design is fantastic. There are many instances of incredible artwork where that shows, I'm trying to find it, sorry guys, where it shows like some of the creatures. Like, look at this map in there. Like, that's fantastic. The design, the art, everything like that, it's amazing. And that's why I really say I'm a big believer that if you are looking for pure epic fantasy, this book is going to be that. It is as epic fantasy can get. So if you want to see cool maps and you want to see cool drawings and you want to see artwork that depicts creatures and art and things like that, you're gonna get it in this book. You're gonna get some really freaking cool stuff. Like, here we go. This is what I was looking for. So that is why, if you want a world to just dive into, I think that you're going to have a blast while reading this. Now, I think this is in every version. I have the hardcover here, and I just took off the dust jacket to show you guys what the design is and everything, if you can even see that. But it's very well put together, and there was a lot of time spent on this and a lot of time spent on the maps and the designs and everything. And so as an author myself who designed my own book and whatnot, that stuff takes time and thought, and it's not easy. And so for him to have put all that effort into really fleshing out the world and developing a book like this and having this artwork, it's inspiring. It's beautiful. The cover is obviously amazing. I mean, one of the best covers out there, right? So truly, I think if you are looking for just epic fantasy at its peak, but you're not looking at the Lord of the Rings and you're not looking at Malazan, I think that this is going to be a great spot to look at and to get into. I'm a Brandon Sanderson fan now. I don't know if I'm a fanatic. I don't know if I'm the biggest fan in the world. I don't know if I'm ever going to read another one of his books. I might. Probably Mistborn. That's the most likely that I'll try and check out. But The Way of Kings has definitely exceeded my expectations. It blew me away. And I think that if you are a true, lover or enjoyer of epic fantasy, and you can truly appreciate when someone has taken the time to craft a beautiful piece of art like this, I think that there's no way that you don't like this. Truly. I don't know how. And now I get it. Like, I get why this book is spoken so highly of. The philosophy in it is fantastic. You're going to get some great philosophical musings, some great quotes in there, great character development, great character arcs. The magic system's fantastic. World building, everything's great. You're going to get amazing stuff. It's going to maybe feel a bit Marvel movie-esque compared to something like that is just pure literature and philosophy and art like The Lord of the Rings is. But if you just want something, if you're locked in a cabin and you're like, man, there's a storm outside, I want to dive into a world, I want to get lost in it, I want to go to a new place that's really developed with languages and different races and different creatures and different cities and tons of deep lore and history that you can just get lost in, but you have almost like superpowers and you have badass, world building elements like shard plates and shard blades that just don't really take themselves too seriously, but are handled with care and precision and time. I think you're going to love this. Like I said, it's not my favorite book of all time, but it's up there. It's probably top 10 now. I don't know if it's top 5. I would have to really look at what my top 5 books are, which, hey, that would be a good video. Let me know if you guys want to see that. But it's up there. It's a fantastic book. It really is. And I think you're going to have a great time with it. So finally, to close this out, I'm going to say that this was a 9 out of 10 for me. It drags, it has pacing issues, but aside from the pacing issues and maybe some characters that I just felt like got a little too much screen time, fantastic. Really, really well crafted, well thought out, well designed, well plotted book that you can just tell this author, Brandon Sanderson, knew what he was doing and took his time with it. And I think that this is probably his magnum opus, maybe his peak. We don't know. We'll have to see, especially how this all culminates, because he's got like 5 more books planned in the Stormlight Archive, which is like the second era. But nothing but respect. Nothing but respect for Brandon Sanderson now. Nothing but respect for this book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Did I love every second? No. Would I read it again? No. Will I even continue this series? Probably not. I don't even have any plans to even read anymore, because that already was just great. And I had a great time with it, and that's maybe all I need. Am I interested in checking out Mistborn? Sure. But will I do any of that anytime soon? No. Not anytime soon. I've got way too many other books and series that I got to get to, and you guys have recommended plenty of books and things like that to check out, and manga and comics and movies and TV shows and video games. I mean, I have so many things to get through. So can I spend so much time on just one author like this? I don't think so, especially with the length of these books. I hate to say it. I don't think I can. But 9 out of 10, would I recommend it? Yes. Will I have a disclaimer and tell people that you should probably be a pretty big fan of epic fantasy before reading this? Because I think it's going to just be one of those where you're going to only be able to put up with this book if you are already a fan of the genre and you know what it's kind of trying to do. It's a good entry point. Maybe I should have read Mistborn before, but like I kind of wanted to read the peak. I think it could be one of those things where it's like you don't need to watch Breaking Bad to understand Better Call Saul, but is it going to be better if you've read or watched Breaking Bad first? Sure. So for this, maybe Mistborn would have been the better place to start. And I would probably say to most people, yeah, start with Mistborn. I just didn't want to take a risk on something that people maybe view as maybe like inferior and not like that, and then be turned off from The Way of Kings and never, reading anything else. So in a way, I'm really happy that I started with The Way of Kings, even though it was maybe a bit too daunting. Even though I got through it, and I'm happy I did. And because it's the longest book I've ever read, I have no anxiety to read virtually any other book. I'm now looking at all these other books on my shelf and I'm like, geez, those are nothing compared to this. Like, this is probably my biggest book on the shelf. Like even Malazan, I'm excited to jump into that now. So yeah, thoroughly impressed, enjoyed the hell out of it. Really, really liked it. I don't know if I would say I loved it, but I did. I loved the ending and I loved the second half of the book. That was fantastic. But as a whole, I really enjoyed it. And I can't rank it anything less than a 9 out of 10 because of all the other great, like I can't make pacing be the only thing, because even the pacing picks up in the second half of the book. So I can't knock the book because of that. Yeah, it's a slow start. First half of the book is tough to get through. I'll admit it. But for everything else that it does well, 9 out of 10. So that does it for The Way of Kings. That does it for the first Brandon Sanderson book I have ever read. I hope it is what you guys were hoping to see and expecting to see. I hope to talk to some of you guys about his books and see what you guys think of what I've said and the book in general. I'm curious. I need to do more research. I need to watch more videos. I need to read more about if other people share these thoughts. I meant to go on the subreddit and read through some reviews and things like that before I did this, but I'm happy that I didn't, because these are just my pure thoughts. I've always been honest with you guys. I've told you guys straight up, I don't even have a script. I just have some random notes here. It's just a stream of consciousness. I'm just telling you guys purely. I finished the book yesterday. I'm telling you guys purely what I thought of it. I don't say anything that I don't truly believe in. This is really just my first impressions of the book. And I hope that it comes across that way to you guys. I hope that I hope these reviews resonate with you guys. And I hope it also helps guide you into deciding whether or not you'll read this or into another series or whatever else. That's just the goal. I don't want to influence anyone on whether or not you should read it. I'm just telling you guys straight up my opinions and what I just thought of it, and whether or not I think it's a good book, or whether or not you should read it, or not even good or bad. It's just what it meant to me subjectively, what it meant to me. So, Way of Kings, check it out. I would recommend it. I think I would, especially if you're a big fan of epic fantasy. I don't want to say you can't get any more epic than this, because I'm sitting behind a couple epic fantasy series that I know are pretty epic. But I would say this is like as epic fantasy as epic fantasy can get. It's up there. It's wild and it's fantastic. Really well done. Brandon Sanderson, A+, man. I'm a fan. Well done. Blew me away. So that does it for the Way of Kings. Now let's just finish up the video and talk about what I'm reading next. This here is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And I know having these two next to each other is kind of insane, but that's the way I do it. I don't, just because I just read something like Brandon Sanderson, I'm not going to not read something like, someone like Cormac McCarthy, because this is like a bit more muted and whatever else. And I think that that's actually a good dichotomy just to mention with the Way of Kings. Brandon Sanderson, he's not going to be that dark. I just want to put that out there. He's never going to get that dark. I think virtually everyone knows that. It doesn't mean he doesn't have some dark aspects in it, but it's just like Harry Potter, where people say, oh, the series gets dark. It doesn't really get that dark. There's some bad stuff that happens. There's a lot of death. There's some curse words, whatever else, but this book's not dark. Brandon Sanderson does not do grimdark or dark fantasy. And don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise, because it's not true. Read something like this to really find out what dark is, or berserk, or the darkness that comes before. That's dark in my mind. Blood Meridian, classic Western. Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite authors. Like I already mentioned, this is an extremely dark book. Very well, world renowned. A lot of people love this book. I'm surprised it's never been adapted. I think it's like unadaptable, but I think it should be. The judge is like a crazy dark character that I'm super excited to like learn more about. I'm already 40 pages into it. I started reading it yesterday. Already was flying through it. I can read Cormac McCarthy's work so quickly, which makes no sense. Like, this is way denser than that, but this took me way longer to read per page than this. I'm loving it so far. I don't really have much to say. I don't know a ton about it. My best friend just read it, so he told me, he's like, dude, you have to read this as soon as possible. So that's what I'm doing. He loves the judge. He thinks he's a crazy character, wants me to check him out. I'm a big fan of dark stories, so I'm super excited to get into this. I love the philosophy in, Cormac McCarthy's work. I love the stories. They just always feel so real and genuine. And it's like he was there. It's like he really lived this stuff, which is kind of crazy to think. And I even love his writing style, even though he doesn't use much punctuation and, the grammar isn't perfect, whatever. It's like, it reads like a screenplay, which as a screenwriter myself, that's what I naturally gravitate towards. And then also it flows. I don't know. It's like you're sitting around a campfire and you're listening to someone tell you a story. It's not going to be perfect. Think about how many times I've messed up in this video. You know, it's never, anytime someone's just dictating something, it's never going to be perfect. And so that's the way I look at this book. It feels like a campfire story, just like The Road did. So on my next book haul, I'm going to maybe buy every single one of Cormac McCarthy's novels. I don't even care what, like, I'm going to buy every single one because I'm just such a massive fan. And I think already 40 pages in this, if it sticks the landing and if it's as good as I think it will be, it'll be in my top 3, top 5 greatest books of all time, of my favorites, you know. It seems like it's going to be fantastic. So it's a huge departure from The Way of Kings, totally different genre, totally different writing style, much darker, all that stuff. But that's what I love about what I do. You know, I like being able to just jump between different books and not really care about what I read previously. Because like after this, I might read Hyperion, which is a sci-fi story. So, and I think that that's a good thing, reminder to all of you guys too. If like you're wondering, oh, what should I read next? Well, I just read this. Read whatever interests you. Don't care about, you know, how similar it was to what you just read. Like, in my opinion, this is the best way to do it because then you don't get too burnt out. Like, I'm not going to read epic fantasy for a minute, but when I do, I'm going to read Lord of the Rings. I bet you guys are happy to hear that. Lord of the Rings is coming, and it's going to be the next book in epic fantasy book in series that I read most likely. I'm going to also read all 3 books all the way through. I'm also going to listen to audiobooks while I'm reading it because I heard the performances are amazing. So that's what's coming next, guys. We got a lot of videos actually coming. I was going to do a video ranking all of the books I've ever read. I'll probably do that after I read Blood Meridian, so expect the Blood Meridian review to come before that. And then I also have a video comparing Kindles and paperbacks because I did a lot of the reading with this book on Kindle because the hardcover is just so massive and it's just kind of sucked to carry around and hold for long hours. So it was like, Kindle is perfect for that. So I've got a lot of stuff to talk about with that. I also want to do another like writing video where I talk about why I write, why I think you guys should write, things like that. And then another book haul coming eventually too. So we got a lot in the pipeline. Excited to get it all out to you guys. I'm excited to be back. Shouldn't have too long of a break after this last one. Like I said, guys, I was just trying to finish The Way of Kings and I didn't want to put anything else out until I finished this. So that's where I was, but now I'm back and we're starting this and hopefully get some more videos out to you guys. So thank you all, as always, for watching. Really appreciate your guys' support. Anyone who reached out while I was gone and commented or engaged with the page really meant a lot to me. I seriously appreciate all of your guys' support. It really means the world to me. I love being able to just talk about books, and I'm glad that these videos resonate with you guys because that's all I'm looking for. I'm just here to talk about books and to share my love of art and things like that. So excited to keep doing it. But anyways, that's pretty much it for today's video, and see you guys at the next one. Take care.